Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all ages, welcome in. Do not adjust your television sets, your phones, or your computers. This is Britt's Fantasy Blitz. I am your host, Britt Flinn, on at 1 Eastern instead of 2. Coop and I decided to have a little Freaky Friday on Friday the 13th and switch some places. Maybe just to throw some people off, but he'll be coming up directly after this. Welcome to the show. I really encourage you guys to ask your questions in the chat. There is no question that's too dumb, too over the top. The only dumb question is the question that you don't ask. So please put everything in the chat. We'll get to those throughout the show. While you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can catch every episode of Britt's Fantasy Blitz. And thank you to our producer, Ernie, for just keeping this whole mad train running on, again, October the 13th. We've already got Toronto Dave in the chat. We've got Skinny McKinney, again, saying happy Friday the 13th. Happy Friday the 13th to you all out there. But let's go ahead and jump into some things today. So this is week 6, right? We've got some big pivots to make because after this week, we're officially a third of the way through the regular season, and we're well on our way to the fantasy football playoffs. So it's time to make those moves if you're struggling. And let's face it, lots of us are struggling. I've likely lost my darling Sam Laporta this week, although he was back at practice today. It is a calf injury, and those can be very iffy. So now I'm scrambling across the waiver wire because no one wants to make trades for their good tight ends because the position is so fickle. So here's my advice to you. If you're in a position where you can make trades, so say if you are at a 4-1 or a 5-0, make a trade for one of these guys who just got put on IR and have some end of season upside because you're already likely well on your way to the playoffs, and getting those guys at the end of the season is just going to make your team a juggernaut. On the flip side, if you're struggling and you're, 2-3, 1-4, just take this day by day. Make some smart waiver wire moves. Focus on getting through the week. You're going to pull your hair out trying to make these moves and get frustrated because nobody wants to trade with you. And let me tell you, I have cobbled together some extremely lucky waiver wire moves from week to week this season. Y'all are going to laugh, but last week when Jahmyr Gibbs went down late in the week with that Thursday injury, I picked up Craig Reynolds. I did not feel great about it. There was literally nobody else out there on the waiver wire, nobody else that I felt confident in playing. You know what? He wasn't great, but he still put 10 points, which is much better than putting up a 0 or putting up a guy who, it's just not produced the entire season. So let's look at your matchups, look at our matchup previews, which I put out yesterday over on fantasyalarm.com, and just take this 1 week at a time. So before we go to some top news around the NFL and recap last night's game, which was crazy low scoring, by the way, Smokey the Cat, hello, Smokey, does have a question in the chat. Godwin or Brees at the flex? I think that I'm going to go Brees Hall. Mike Evans practiced in full today. It looks like that he is going to be able to go this week. Brees is coming on very strong and has a favorable matchup, even against the Eagles. Their defensive line is banged up. I think that Brees Hall has another great week, so I would go with Brees. Jared says, can't relate sitting around at 5-0 and 4-1. Hey, Jared, you know what? It's the tortoise and the hare. It's not how you start. It's how you finish. And Andrew Cooper confirming the Brees Hall comment in the chat saying, unleash the Brees. All right, so let's talk a little bit about last night's game and do a Thursday night recap. The Chiefs only scored 19 points, but the pitiful Broncos only scored 8. Before I get into the game, I want to talk about the Steve Smith commentary prior to the game. Ernie, if you just want to roll that clip and then we can dissect it a little bit after.
while ago, Broncos wide receiver Jerry Jeudy was walking by, and Steve called out to him, and he got a different reaction.
I called out to him because on my podcast, Cut to It, I just talked about guys that maybe have not showed up in the way or in the manner. And so the word that I've used to describe him in the past was a jag, just a guy.
Just a guy.
And so when I saw him, he's playing well. I wanted to say to him face to face, like, hey, I know I said some things in the past I probably shouldn't have, and I'm sorry. That's what I wanted to say to him. His response, Mike Robb and Bucky, was ninja.
Ninja?
Yes, I'm using the word ninja. I'm just using the word ninja. I don't mess with you. And it was a curse word. And so I was like, all right. And then he repeated it. So I'll say it again. I'm sorry that I said you were a jag, just a guy who's an average wide receiver they use a first-round pick on that isn't doing anything. I hope today that you actually show up in a way that you haven't showed up in the last couple of years since they drafted you. So if you ever got a problem with Agent 89, I'm sorry for saying that you're an average wide receiver that they eventually will move on. And when teams call me and asking, should they trade for you, I will say no, don't trade for Jerry Jeudy, because he's mentally unable to handle constructive criticism from people who watch specifically, can he be a wide receiver? He could be a wide receiver. He's a tier 3. Go back into the studio. I'm done now. Thank you.
Brett?
I mean, wow. There are so many levels of that to dissect. First off, that was not very professional. And I don't know how many people are calling Steve Smith to ask if Jerry Jeudy should be traded, unless they're the Carolina Panthers. So Jerry Jeudy has been disappointing, sure, but he's suffered through injury, not even soft tissue things like freak accidents, like high ankle sprains, things like that. He's played the past 2 seasons with Russell Wilson, the first year of which we thought that it was Nathaniel Hackett's problem. The second of which, it just looks like that Russell Wilson is a system quarterback and is not very good in any offense outside of Pete Carroll's system. I don't think that was very called for. Also, asking to apologize or talk to a player right before they had a big game against the undefeated Chiefs, or undefeated to them for the past 15 games, of course he's going to turn him down. He's not going to want to talk to him. I do think that Steve Smith got in a little bit of trouble about his comments, because he did clarify his comments after the game, saying that he was 41 years old, he didn't need the drama, and he didn't need to tear him down and say something that would affect his career. But then he went on to say again that Jerry Jeudy was just a jag. So, I mean, just wow. That's a lot of things to talk about, especially with Jerry Jeudy being one of the top names in the trade market that's actually occurring in a couple weeks. All right, so let's talk about the Chiefs. Their offense looked so stagnant despite Mahomes throwing for over 300 yards. They got into the red zone a few times, but they weren't able to convert. Mahomes threw a pick in the red zone. They tried a fake field goal that didn't work out. It was just kind of weird all the way around, especially considering how bad the Broncos defense has been and the fact that they were playing in Arrowhead. You would think that maybe the wind was playing a part in that inefficiency. But again, Mahomes still threw for 300 yards. So there's something else going on there. And I think that it's the lack of a number 1 wide receiver. Now, on that note, Rashee Rice is kind of emerging as that number 1 guy. He had a little bit of a breakout game. And even though he didn't find the end zone this time, he finished with 4 receptions, but 72 yards. His speed is insane. And his instinct to gain yards after the catch is really amazing to watch. So I think that if the Chiefs can get him involved, he should definitely be on your radar as somebody that you can start down the stretch as the Chiefs finally figure this out. And speaking about figuring this out, while they did come away with the win, they're going to have to get some of their receivers and the run game going better so teams don't key in and shut them down later on in the season. Mahomes himself addressed the team's offensive struggles, and he credited the defense with the win. Aside from Travis Kelce, there wasn't much to write home about the Kansas City Chiefs. So let's get to the Broncos, and I will give this to the Broncos. Their defense came to play. I can't say the same for Russell Wilson in the pass game. Coming back from halftime, they put a stat on the screen saying that the first half passing yardage was the least they had thrown since 2020. You think 2020, well, that's not that long ago. That's only 3 years. No, that 2020 game was the game where every single quarterback had COVID and the Broncos had to start a wide receiver, Kendall Hinton, at quarterback. That does not speak well on Russell Wilson or any of these receivers for that matter. Russell Wilson does not look good. I don't think you can blame this all on the receivers. He was getting passes batted down at the line of scrimmage. They were in a negative game script, and he still couldn't get anything done. Sutton's day was saved by that touchdown that was almost not called a touchdown towards the end, but things don't look good for the Broncos. And on a final note, it turns out that the answer to all the start-sit questions between Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin was neither. The Broncos only had 115 yards of total rushing, split between Williams, McLaughlin, and Wilson. It is just a tough scene in their run game. So before I get to the injury news, and there is a ton of injury news that just came out, so I'll give you a chance to grab your pen and paper before we go through that. But Toronto Dave wants to know PPR start to Gallup, Josh Reynolds, and Robert Woods. I'm leaning Reynolds and Robert Woods, even with that rib ailment that he's been battling through. Look, I'm a Cowboys fan. Michael Gallup has just not looked good. He's been out there running routes. I think he's only being targeted on 13% of the routes. This whole Texas coast offense that Mike McCarthy has implemented is not working. It does not look good. I know that this game is supposed to be very high scoring. It's the highest over under on the slate, but you cannot trust Michael Gallup in your lineup. And with Nico Collins covered by Marshawn Lattimore, I think that Stroud is going to have to find somebody else to throw it to, and that guy's got to be Robert Woods. So let's move on to some top news and injury news. Frank Clark, speaking of the Broncos, we can't get away from the Broncos today. He was released or is expected to be released this morning. He was talked about as a potential trade piece, but it doesn't look like that is going to happen. Justin Herbert also expects no restrictions against the Cowboys on Monday night. So that should help make your lineup decisions a little easier, especially with it being a Monday night game. So again, going to injury news, grab your pen and paper because there is a ton to get through. It's going to feel like I'm reading a newspaper again, but it's going to help your start-sit decisions on Sunday. But if you can't, or if you're having trouble making those decisions, make sure to tune in Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern to the Fantasy Alarm YouTube channel with myself and John and Pemba as we help you get ready and go through all your start sit questions. Tune in to SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio at 10 a.m. Eastern with Howard Bender and Andrew Cooper, and then wrap it all back around with John and Pemba and Coop on the Fantasy Alarm YouTube as all those inactives are announced. Ann says, can we ever start Brandon Cooks? Until I see something back or something out of him, I really don't think you can. And it's been highly disappointing, both as a fantasy manager and as a Cowboys fan. So I have to hit this injury note first. And although it's not directly fantasy related, Titans nose tackle Teair Tart did not practice on Thursday ahead of the London trip. He is making the journey over there with them, but he missed last week, and he was a big part of why the Titans' run defense was so stout. There is supposed to be some rain and possibly some wind in London, so there may be a much bigger run game script from the Ravens than we're used to seeing. And if Tart is out, that's going to benefit Gus Edwards and Justice Hill in a big way. So Bears running back Roschon Johnson is still not practicing, so his status is very up in the air for Sunday. With Khalil Herbert also out with that high ankle injury sprain, it's likely that we see a heavy dose of Donta Foreman. We don't really know how he's going to produce in this offense, but we have seen him come in clutch with the Titans a couple years ago when he stepped in for Derrick Henry, and with the Panthers last year when he stepped in for Christian McCaffrey. So we could see a good game from him against a very bad Vikings defense. On the flip side of that game, Jordan Addison has been dealing with an ankle injury for the Vikings, but he is expected to play. So that's very good news with Justin Jefferson out. DK Metcalf hasn't been practicing this week as well, But keep an eye on the practice reports today as they come out on the West Coast because he has been skipping midweek practices and returning Friday. It's just kind of been his thing. So don't get too worried about DK Metcalf unless he's another DNP today. Bengals receiver T. Higgins has been battling through a fractured rib, but he has logged limited practices this week. And although he is still questionable, he himself said it's looking promising. We're cautious about players diagnosing themselves and also Zach Taylor putting players out there and using them as decoys, which he has done specifically with T. Higgins in the past. But this is the information that we have at the moment, and we're rolling with it. In other news, things just get worse for the Cleveland Browns. After speculating all week that it would be PJ Walker starting at quarterback for them, it was confirmed that Deshaun Watson will indeed be out. At this point, after he was medically cleared in week 4, but just didn't feel up to it, you have to wonder if it's a little bit more than an injury causing his absence. Tank Dell has been ruled out for the Houston Texans. We talked about Robert Woods being banged up with a rib injury. And with Nico Collins facing Marshawn Lattimore, it could be a long day for Houston's offense. Zay Jones for the Jaguars has also once again been ruled out after he re-aggravated an injury over on the Turf Monster in London last week. Panthers running back Miles Sanders was just ruled out before this. In my notes, I say he still hasn't practiced, but I got the notification saying he'd been ruled out. We should be in line for another big dose of Chuba Hubbard, but be very cautious about starting him because that Panthers offensive line is very, very banged up. 3 or 4 of them are still listed as questionable, one of whom is Chandler Savala, who actually went to the hospital with that neck injury. Mr. Scampers in the chat says Panthers also lost both safeties. So this game just got even uglier. Ugh, Scampers. The bad news. Just rolling with bad news. Devontae Adams is still logging limited practices, but is expected to play. Jahmyr Gibbs still isn't practicing, but Sam Laporta did return to practice. Again, as I mentioned, today is going to be a crucial day for Mike Evans, but we think that he's going to be a full go. We're also keeping a close eye on the practice report out of Arizona's backfield, as Keontae Ingram is listed as the RB1 on the depth chart, but he has been limited with a neck injury. So I still expect a lot of Amari DiMarcado. The Giants for the Sunday night primetime game. What a gross primetime game, y'all. They have huge injury issues. Daniel Jones has been ruled out. Saquon Barkley, Darren Waller, Wan'Dale Robinson are all questionable. And I'm not going to even talk about the injuries on their offensive line because, again, 3 or 4 of them are listed as questionable, and even their starters haven't been playing good. So how are the backups going to perform? It's going to be gross. On the flip side, the Bills still have both tight ends, Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox, listed as questionable. For Monday night's game, finally, Tony Pollard is listed as questionable. So we will be watching his practice status today to see if he can go and see if it's more of a veteran rest situation or if he's actually dealing with a more significant injury. And as I mentioned earlier, Justin Herbert and Austin Eckler practiced in full, so they are both expected to go. So hope you guys got all that. If you didn't, you can rewatch this on the Fantasy Alarm YouTube page on replay. Let's jump into a couple of these questions. I think Jared had a question down there. Rest of season. Man, Jared, I don't really do rest of season because here's the thing. I'm Team Howard Bender on this all the way. There are matchups, there are injuries on both sides of the ball. There are different situations that can pop up. It makes it very difficult to rank rest of season and things can change. If I'm looking at it for week 6, I do like Nakua still. I like Pittman and I like Ridley. After there, it's Higgins, Gabe Davis, Chark, and Dotson. But things can change. Somebody could pop up on the injury report this afternoon. We've seen it happen all the time. So that's why we try to shy away from doing rest of season. Unfortunately, I know I'm not much help to you, but keep those questions rolling in. Mr. Scamper says, I'm starting Salvin Ahmed over Gus Edwards this week. I'm a big underdog and totally, seriously fine. I promise. I will say if Jeff Wilson is activated from IR, I would switch over to Gus Edwards. if Tier Tart doesn't play, which it doesn't look like he's going to, that push could be just what you need. I think if you're the big underdog, you need some upside. And Edwards has a lot more upside than Ahmed, especially with Wilson back. Brad McCoy, Twitch gang in here. Start Hubbard versus Miami or Brian Robinson versus Atlanta. I think I'm leaning Brian Robinson here. They both have very tough matchups, but the offensive line in Carolina scares me a ton. A ton. I don't like Hubbard's efficiency as well. Brian Robinson has actually been very good this season, aside from last week's game, which just I think was a game script situation that got completely out of hand. Even with a tough matchup, he should bounce back this week. Finally, Big Trev, before we get into some other things today, full PPR, T. Higgins, Josh Downs, or Amari Cooper. I'm going Josh Downs train all the way, baby. And if you stick around for the next segment, I will explain why in full. So I was talking about last night's game and how we were talking back and forth. And we were talking back and forth on the BetterCast app. If you haven't tried it yet, you should. Go download it both on Apple and Google Play stores. And you can join free-to-play contests. You can win prizes. You can predict what's going to happen, what the next play is going to be. And the best part about it is that you can chat with our community about the big plays, the top performers, the busts. We were laughing so hard about that fake field goal that happened last night. So if you haven't joined or downloaded the BetterCast app, make sure that you do that today and join us Sunday night. And we can probably once again make fun of the Giants and the Bills in a very sloppy primetime game. I also mentioned our matchup reports that we have over on fantasyalarm.com. That is included with our All Pro subscription. And starting yesterday, we're actually offering a humongous deal on our annual subscription. We are currently running $100 off of our annual subscription. So if you go to there, fantasyalarm.com/allpro to sign up today, click annual, use the promo code LOCK, and it is 60% off of all of our content for an entire year. To break that down, that comes out to around $16 a month for all of our content. We're talking tools, we're talking articles, we're talking all sports. Literally everything that you could want is included in that All Pro package. So go over there to fantasyalarm.com/allpro and take advantage of this while you can. All right, so we went through these injuries, which were so long, and I hope that we don't have any more. But now let's talk some matchups, whether they're set to blow up in your lineups or whether they are set to trap you. Again, if you want to check out all the matchups for week 6, make sure to head over to Fantasy Alarm and look at the week 6 matchup report for all 15 games. So let's do a little start sit-em. On my start-em list, number 1 is Calvin Ridley. And this is not just because I've been a Calvin Ridley truther the entire offseason. This is because he has a premium matchup against the Indianapolis Colts. And shout out to Jordan Van Eck for this information he posted on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days. But the Colts run cover 3 defense at one of the highest rates in the league. When Calvin Ridley is faced with cover 3, he is averaging 4.64 yards per route, not per target, per route. This is so lofty, but just extrapolating some data from a couple weeks ago, say he runs 35 routes, just say half of them are against cover 3. That would be 83.5 receiving yards. He is set up for a huge, humongous, gigantic, large, whatever adjective you want to use, week, especially now that Zay Jones has been ruled out. Next, going back to Brad and his question in the chat, is Josh Downs versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. So while he hasn't been getting the snaps that we typically like to see, when he is on the field, he is a target funnel. With Gardner Minshew in, the Colts should pass even more, leading Downs to get even more targets against Trey Herndon, who has not been great covering the slot. Let's just be a little bit honest on that. Next is DJ Moore versus the Minnesota Vikings. Guys, let's not overanalyze this. Moore is on a streak. He's a must start in your lineup, especially against a Caleb Evans. Caleb Evans has allowed 2.1 yards of separation and 1.91 fantasy points allowed per target. DJ Moore, I know it's supposed to be a little bit windy in Chicago, but I don't think it's going to be windy to the point where it's going to affect the pass that much. And DJ Moore and Justin Fields only have eyes for each other. We'll get to your questions as soon as we get through these starts before we get into the sits. So hang tight in there. Our next guy on the stardom list is Logan Thomas versus the Atlanta Falcons. So this is another hot hand that we're riding. And the Atlanta secondary has been very, very good. But that's led to them giving up a ton of fantasy points to the tight end. They've actually given up the second most fantasy points to that position through 5 weeks. And with AJ Terrell, on Terry McLaurin, with Jahan Dotson, and Jeff Okuda, I think Curtis Samuel could be a play in here, but the guy from this game that I want on Washington's offense is Logan Thomas. He's a top 10 tight end, and that's even with him missing a few games. You've got to start him this week. Next, we've got Alvin Kamara versus the Houston Texans. Guys, the Texans, they've improved against the run. They're not as bad as they were last week or last year, but they're still, the run is the way to beat the Texans. And they have been actually pretty stingy against the wide receivers. They're only allowing the third fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers. And Kamara has the receiving and rushing upside. So I think he gets a ton of work in this matchup. Next up, we've got Raheem Mostert versus the Carolina Panthers. And this should be a no-brainer, plug and play. With Achane out and Wilson coming back from an IR stint himself, or maybe not even coming back, Mostert is going to get heavy, heavy, heavy work in a very favorable game script against the Panthers defense that's allowing 140 rushing yards per game and the second most fantasy points per game to the running back. To close it out here real quick before we get to your questions, Justin Fields versus the Vikings. Much like with DJ Moore, we're riding the hot hand here against a bad defense. Minnesota is in the bottom 10 in points allowed to the quarterback, and with Fields' rushing ability, he has much more upside than a lot of other options do. That said, I do expect him to fall off at some point throughout the season, but we're riding this hot hand in this streak as long as it lasts. Finally, the last of my stardoms is Trevor Lawrence versus the Colts. Remember when we were talking about cover 3 and the Colts and how good Calvin Ridley was going to be about it? Lawrence is averaging 10 yards against cover 3. And that combination of him to Ridley is going to be deadly this week in what I think could be a high-scoring matchup. All right, before we get to our sits, let's go to a couple of these questions. I'm wanting to make sure that I don't miss anything. I think we're starting with GT Sport, Chuba or DeMarcado. You know, this is rough. I would like to go with Chuba just because of the carries. But again, that offensive line and the defense really scares me. So I'm going to roll with DeMarcado, see what we've got there. Next from GT Sport, Flex 1, Stevenson, Palmer, Down, Osborne's, or Samuel. I'm still rolling with Josh Downs here. I think that he is the most reliable guy out of those. Again, Stevenson on paper looks like he has a good matchup, but he has yet to produce. And that's another team with huge offensive line problems and quarterback problems and play calling problems and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Palmer has the Cowboys. I still think it's going to be Keenan Allen working out of the slot. Osborne, we've seen Osborne be on the field, but he still hasn't gotten the targets. So why would Justin Jefferson change anything? I think that gets much more funneled to Addison and to TJ Hawkinson and maybe even Josh Oliver, which we'll talk about in a second. Mr. Scampers. Oh, sorry. I skipped another one from you, GT. My apologies. Pick 2, Ridley, DJ Moore, or Puka. After the starts, we're going Ridley and DJ Moore. If you can find a way to get Puka in there, I would do it. But I think against the Arizona Cardinals, we're going to see a little bit of Kieran Williams and a lot less passing from them. Mr. Scampers saying, is Debo helped by the inclement weather in Cleveland? Are we starting KJ Osborne, Addison in Chicago over him? I'm starting Addison in Chicago over Debo. I would be hard-pressed to find Cleveland even putting up 3 points. I don't think that Cleveland is going to do anything. I know that their defense is tough, But I think San Francisco is just going to lean on their laurels and run the ball. They're not going to have to do anything else. Brock Purdy's not going to have to do anything else. Addison, on the other hand, this game could be set up to be kind of a shootout. I've seen predictions going both ways, with the Bears coming out on a win streak and the Vikings coming out and finally asserting themselves, um, even without Justin Jefferson. So I like Addison in this matchup. It seems like the ankle's fine, so we'll just go with him. Mr. Scampers, with some injury news here. Darius Slay and Jalen Carter questionable for Philadelphia. Gotta see. Gotta wait and see until those final reports come out, because on the flip side, we keep hearing that DJ Reed is practicing in full for the Jets. But then Robert Saleh came out and said, well, we'll see if he suits up. I don't trust these questionable reports, especially with veterans like these. Let's wait. Pop in on the Sunday morning show and we'll dissect it a little bit further. Finally, AA, great to see you in here. Is Ezekiel Elliott droppable? Should I pick up Donta Foreman for him? I would this week. If you're in need of somebody this week, with Roschon still not clearing protocol, with Herbert out, with that Vikings defense, Foreman's going to get the work. And Zeke has just not been it, as much as it hurts my soul to say that. All right, let's move on to some sit-ems for this week. And this is going to be kind of controversial for a couple of these players because they've been hot. The first one being Amari Cooper. I really like Amari Cooper. I really, really do. But this is not the matchup to play him in. Not only does he get the 49ers in some bad weather, like Mr. Scampers mentioned, but he now gets PJ Walker in at quarterback. Let's not do that this week. Sucks to bench such a great talent, but again, with fantasy football, you have to take the totality of the circumstances in when you make lineup decisions, and the totality is not looking totally great. Next, we've got Nico Collins versus the Saints. I really hated including Collins on this list because I had to start him in a league, but I do not feel good about it. Again, he'll be facing Marshawn Lattimore with Tank Dell out and Robert Woods banged up. There's going to be even more focus on him. He could end up being a target funnel and coming down with a few balls, but it's just not going to be pretty. Jared Goff versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is my next sit-em. And look, Goff has been playing really well. I get that. But the fact is, he doesn't perform well away from home or in outside facilities. In his 2 road games so far this season, he's only averaging 231 yards and 1 touchdown per game. And with Gibbs already out, Laporta possibly out, it's going to be tougher. Let's expect a lot of running work. Let's just let Goff be the game manager. He's going to disappoint you if you have to put him in your lineup this week. Next, I've got Rachaad White on the other side of that matchup versus the Lions. Look, the Lions defense is very good against the run. They have actually shocked me overall with how great their defense has been. They're allowing the second fewest fantasy points to the running back position. And unfortunately, Rachaad White has been one of the most inefficient backs in the entire league. Let's jump to this question in the chat from Big Trev. Am I playing Chuba or Ford in a standard league? Because that I could not have asked for a better segue, because my next guy on the sit-em list is Jerome Ford. Look, I've already said that I don't like Chuba Hubbard, but I like him miles ahead of Jerome Ford in this matchup. I would be surprised if the Browns reached 100 total yards in this game. With PJ Walker, the 49ers aren't going to respect the pass. They're going to stack the box. It's just going to be a bad time for Ford. And honestly, aside from those 2 1-yard touchdowns that he got against the Titans, Ford has not been great. He has not been the plug and play replacement for Nick Chubb that we all thought that he was going to be. So definitely not playing Ford. Best of luck to you playing Chuba. I hope for your sake that I'm wrong and that he has a very great game. Next, I'm going Sam Howell versus the Falcons and Terry McLaurin versus the Falcons. We can just kind of do a 2 for here. Sam Howell has kind of been the wonder kid over the past few weeks, but look at who he's faced. Yes, I do think that Logan Thomas is still going to be viable because of that tight end pass funnel, but I will not be surprised when Hal throws an interception or two trying to force some throws. And Atlanta's actually been pretty good in turnover differential. I believe that they are the sixth highest projected defense this week on DraftKings. And with Terry McLaurin, for much of the same reason, I'm not starting Sam Howell. I'm not starting McLaurin. The Falcons rank sixth in total DVOA against the wide receiver one, and McLaurin really hasn't made much of an impact so far this year when Logan Thomas has been in the game. I'm just not doing it. Finally, Tyler Higbee versus the Arizona Cardinals. The return of Cooper Kupp, along with the emergence of Puka Nacua, has really tanked the stock of Tyler Higbee. He went from 9 targets in week 4 to just 3 in week 5. And the Cardinals have actually been very stingy to the tight end position. They're only surrendering 5.9 fantasy points per game. It's not going to be a great game for him. So before we move on, I just want to hit on some favorite sneaky cheapies for DFS in case you're so inclined, because I always love these guys. And with all these guys on the injury report, there are some very, very favorable salaries going on over on DraftKings. First is Jeff Wilson, 4,300 on DraftKings. The Dolphins are negative 13.5-point favorites. This game should be a heavy run game script. And even if he is on a snap count with as porous as the Panthers' run defense is, he could easily return on his salary. I'm going to grab your questions right after this, so just make sure to hold tight just a second. Next, we have Michael Wilson, who is only $3,700 on DraftKings. We know that he laid an egg last week. Okay, we know. I had him as one of my plays, and I loved him. But things should get better for him against the Rams. This was my fault last week, not taking into account the amount of man coverage versus the amount of zone coverage. Wilson apparently thrives in zone defenses, finishing in the top 10 among not just rookies, every single wide receiver in the league when faced with zone coverage. And the Rams run the most zone coverage, or at a top 10 rate of zone coverage. So he'll also likely be very low rostered since he laid an egg last week. And at 3,700, he could go off against the Rams. Next, I've got Josh Oliver, tight end for the Minnesota Vikings, 2,500 on DK. The loss of Justin Jefferson obviously gives a boost to Jordan Addison and KJ Osborne, but I really wouldn't be surprised to see the Vikings run more 12 personnel instead of throwing Brandon Powell into 11 personnel. It just seems that Josh Oliver is the better guy, and we've already kind of seen him thrown in there sneakily in the early part of the year. He's got 8 receptions on the season, which doesn't sound great, but he also has 1 touchdown. And at 2,700 or 2,500 on DK, if you're looking to pay down at tight end, this could be a guy in a sea of nothingness at the position. Finally, we've got Gardner Minshew, $5,000 on DK. Again, I think if the salary makers at DK had known that Richardson was going to be placed on IR, his salary would be much higher. But here we are with $5,000. He's not going to put up the 40 points or anything like that you would expect from some of these higher priced quarterbacks, but the savings that you get in your lineup are well worth the safe floor that Gardner Minshew provides. All right, so next we'll be moving on to bold predictions, but before that, I want to get to your questions in the chat. GT Sport, would I play Tutu over Amari? Yeah, I would. I know that Tutu's role has decreased quite a bit, but he did see that touchdown last week. The Rams still throw a ton. And again, I just don't trust PJ Walker or anybody on that offense. So Chandler, great to see you, and great question, because this is tough for me as well. Start Amari or Terry this week since they're both on my sit list. I think I'm still starting Terry. I'm staying as far away from Amari Cooper as humanly possible. It's not going to be great. I don't want to sugarcoat it for you. It's not going to be great, but maybe he'll get some targets. Maybe he'll come down with a couple of long bombs. We'll just have to see what happens. Thoughts and prayers with you there. So Mr. Scampers has Gabe Davis and Saquon in Sunday Night Football. Would I bench Olave at Houston for either? or roll with Olave and wait for Saquon's update. This one is tough. I don't want to say Gabe Davis, but I do want to say Gabe Davis. He's been quietly consistent over the past few weeks, and I'm not even sure that Saquon ends up playing. Even if he does, that offensive line, as I mentioned earlier, really gives me the heebie-jeebies. Halloween is still, 20 something days away, 18 days away, math. But yeah, it's already spooky season when it comes to Saquon Barkley and the Giants offensive line. So I think that I would start Gabe Davis. It's the game script might not lend itself to a ton of points, but we know how Josh Allen doesn't really care. He'll air it out no matter how much they run the score up. And done. Underdog special. McLaurin over or under 53.5 total yards. I'm going to go under. I just don't think that he's going to get there. The targets might be there, and he might break off for one, but AJ Terrell has been very good. The Atlanta Falcons defense has been very good against the wide receiver one. I see this going as much more of a Logan Thomas and Curtis Samuel game. So good luck to you there. And then AA bench 1 half PPR, Hopkins, Kirk, or Foreman. I'm benching Foreman this week. I know he's going to get the workload, but DeAndre Hopkins, with that no Treylon Burks, is going to be the focal point of this passing attack. Christian Kirk, again, that cover 3 that we talked about with Trevor Lawrence, 10 yards per attempt. Christian Kirk is going to eat. After hearing your sit-em, would you start Spears over Rashad? I actually would. And we'll talk a little bit about that in our underdog pick'ems coming up shortly as to why. He's almost been seeing a 50-50 snap share split with Derrick Henry. And while Derrick Henry has been getting the carries, Spears has been getting the targets. And he's been pretty explosive with those. And the Ravens defense is pretty good across the board. But where they might have a little chink in their armor is allowing receptions to running backs. They rank 15th. They've allowed 4.6 running back receptions or receptions to the running back per game. I actually am high on Spears this week in a very tough matchup. So sorry, Rashad, you got to warm the bench this week. K9 from Nino Pena having a tougher schedule moving on. Should I trade now or write it out? I don't know who K9 is. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? And then we'll go from there and I'll try to answer that question. But now it is the time. And I want to hear what you guys have to say in the comments because I am all for spicy. I am all for bold. I want to hear everything. So this is going to be our week 6 bold predictions. And that's who I thought. I just didn't want to, in the chat, Kenneth Walker, that's who I assumed, but I just wanted to make sure that I got it correctly. No, I don't. I think you should stick with him. Who else are you going to get at this point? Who else are you looking to acquire? What does your depth look like on your roster? All of these things I need to know, but running back has been especially terrible this season in fantasy. If you've got a guy who's getting the workload and is actually doing something with it, you hold on to him. I will be the first to admit that I thought that Zach Charbonnet was going to eat into Walker's workload, but he's not. And as long as he's not, we've got to continue rolling with Walker. So there we go. Yeah, Scampers, you did jinx my bold prediction about the Cardinals last week. But you know what? All the Joe Burrow managers were extremely excited about it, and Jamar Chase managers for that. So I think I can forgive you for jinxing my pick. So, all right, guys, I hope you have your predictions ready in the chat so we can talk about them. But I'm going to go through a few of mine to get started, and they may just surprise you a little bit. And I'm going to start off with a super spicy one. Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be a QB1 in fantasy this week. The Patriots are dealing with a ton of injuries in their secondary, including Jonathan Jones, Kyle Duggar, Jabril Peppers. They already lost Christian Gonzalez on IR. Matthew Judon, their linebacker, is still not practicing. With Devontae Adams seeing much more favorable coverage and another week removed from a shoulder injury, the Raiders should be able to absolutely feast in the passing game. And he has a lot of haters to quiet. So there we go. Next, Zay Flowers finally has a breakout game against the Titans secondary and scores a touchdown. Roger McCreary is averaging 2.1 yards of separation. He's allowed 8.5 yards per reception and 6.4 yards per target. Flowers has already had his share of growing pains as a rookie. We've kind of seen him make some mistakes, but all rookies make mistakes. But he is undoubtedly the number one wide receiver so far on this offense. And I think he's finally going to pop off across the pond this weekend. Next, I've got Kyle Pitts finds the end zone against the Commanders. Look, we've all been disappointed on Kyle Pitts. If you follow Fantasy Alarm on Twitter, I even made a song about how disappointed I was in Kyle Pitts. And if you haven't seen that, go check it out on the Fantasy Alarm Twitter page. But this week, I think that he does buck that trend. He finally had a decent week last week, and I expect him to keep that going this week, especially against a Commanders defense that hasn't been that great has been pretty great against the position, but allowed a touchdown to Cole Kmet last week. So let's go Kyle Pitts. Let's keep this rolling. Finally, I think the Buccaneers beat the Lions and go 4-1. They are, in fact, this year's Seattle Seahawks. We talked about Jared Goff's woes on the road, and now with no Jahmyr Gibbs and likely no Sam Laporta, it's going to be a rough day. It's going to be a rough day. And the creamsicle. The power of the creamsicle is going to get this done. So I think we've got a few predictions here in the chat. Mr. Scampers, Miami breaks an NFL scoring record, or the Panthers upset the Dolphins. One or the other. One or the other. What's it going to be? It's going to be a hit or miss for sure. I'm more leaning. I don't know if they'll break the scoring record because I think that Mike McDaniel is classy enough that he will keep it chill. But yeah, I think they're going to score a lot of points in that game. Ann Dunn says Drake London touchdown this weekend. Hey, I can see it. I love it. The Commanders secondary looked horrible against DJ Moore last week, and Drake London is bound to have a breakout game. It's just, you can't have that much of a target share and it finally not pop off. I hate to use the he's due argument, but he's due. And finally, Ann in the chat, thank you guys so much for these predictions. Puka more yards than Cup this week. That is a spicy one, Ann. Let's come back to that on the Better Cast on Sunday night, and we can check notes. GT Sport saying that the 49ers and Browns might be closer than we think. I don't disagree with that, just because I think that it's going to be such a defensive dogfight. No pun intended to the Cleveland Browns dog pound. But I think the weather, both defenses, it could be hard for anyone on either team to score any kind of points. So those are our bold predictions. Again, join the Better Cast on Sunday. Let's chat back and forth. If mine came true, if yours came true, let's compare notes. I would love to chat with you about it during the Sunday night game, because the Lord knows it's going to be a very slow Sunday night game. If you've been watching the show for a while, or if you're new here, Britt's Fantasy Blitz is, of course, sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy offers new contests and chances to win every single day. You can play their Pick'em contest by choosing higher or lower on 2 to 5 of your favorite players' stats. And the more that you pick, the more that you can win. You can choose from MLB, NFL, PGA, all kinds of sports. Underdog Fantasy also offers daily drafts with leagues ranging from 2 to 12 players. So now there is a brand new way to play Underdog Fantasy. You can also make in-game picks with their in-game pick'em. All you need to do to get involved and start playing is to sign up at fantasyalarm.com/underdog with the promo code ALARM. First-time depositors get a 100% deposit match. It used to be $100. Folks, it is now up to $500. 100% deposit match using promo code ALARM. So if you're new to Underdog, go on over there, sign up. Underdog is also giving away $2 million this season for $100,000 Sundays. It's 10 players who each get $10,000, making an entry with the player of Underdog's choice. This week, it happens to be New Orleans Saints wide receiver Chris Olave. So if you choose the higher or lower on the 56.5 total yards versus the Houston Texans, you're automatically entered to win. For what it's worth, I'm going lower on that prop. But of course, you want to make some picks before the game too, right? And pair that Olave pick up with a few. So let's talk about some that are available for week 6. I do feel like here recently, I've been putting a curse on the players that I pick. So, as always, feel free to follow or to fade my choices for Underdog this week. First up, we've got Zay Flowers from Baltimore with 5 receptions. I'm taking the higher. He's only gone under this in 2 games this year. He has a very favorable matchup with Roger McCreary, and he's averaging 8 targets per game. I absolutely love this. Higher than 5 receptions across the pond in London. Tajay Spears, going back to a question that we were discussing earlier, 14.5 receiving yards. I'm taking the higher. As he's been worked in over the past 2 weeks, he's been getting a ton of receiving work and targets, and his explosiveness is on display. The Ravens defense, again, is stout across the board, but they are allowing 4.6 receptions to the running backs on average per game. And Spears is averaging 9 yards per reception over the past 2 games. So let's go. Higher than 14.5 receiving yards for Tajay Spears. Next, I'm going to go Jamar Chase, 7 receptions. I'm again taking the higher. With T. Higgins questionable and or a decoy, Chase is going to have another huge role. I kind of feel like this is a free square right here. And to piggyback off of that, Devon Witherspoon, 5 tackles plus assists. I'm going to take the higher. I'm going with this prop because although the rookie has been good, he is going to allow catches, and he's hit at or over that number in each of the last 3 games. Witherspoon is going to be all over Chase, and that stat is too good to pass up at just 5 combined tackles and assists. Next, we're going to go with Logan Thomas, 36.5 receiving yards. I'm going to take the higher again. Guys, we're going up, up, up here. We just talked about Logan Thomas, so we don't need to harp on this. This is another free square. Next, we're going to go DJ Moore, 59.5 receiving yards. We're going to go higher. Caleb Evans is going to give up a ton of yards, and DJ Moore has been on a tear. Let's go. Finally, Dallas Goedert, 37.5 receiving yards. I'm going to go higher. DJ Reed is still questionable to suit up. We heard that he's been practicing, but Robert Saleh today said that we'll see if he goes. Sauce Gardner actually also didn't practice today, said that he was not feeling well. So with all the questions in their secondary, I love Goddard to have another big week, especially against a defense that has allowed the second most fantasy points to the tight end. So that wraps up our underdog picks of the day. Let's just imagine Higher by Eminem or Higher by Whitney Houston or something like that playing in the background to lead us out, because somehow this week I'm going higher all the way. I just see it going that way, and I really, really like these matchups. Again, to sign up, go to fantasyalarm.com/underdog, use the promo code ALARM, and first-time users get a 100% deposit match up to $500. Along with these pick'em contests, again, they're also running weekly contests and in-game pick'em contests. There is something for everyone over at Underdog. So go on over there, get signed up, and go check it out. So, and Mr. Scampers, I was trying to avoid the Creed reference. As a millennial, I ran Creed into the ground, and it is something that I am not proud of, but I think that I wore out that Creed album with the song Higher, and now you're giving me flashbacks to take me out. Really appreciate that, Mr. Scampers. But that's we're getting close to the end of our show, so I was just joking, Mr. Scampers. I do appreciate you and everybody else in the chat and everyone. Thank you so much for asking all your questions. Really appreciate you. Make sure that you sign up for that All Pro subscription. Take advantage of that $100 off our annual package using promo code LOCK for the entire year. That will get you all of our articles, all of our tools, all of our sports that will also get you into our Discord where you can chat live with our experts about these questions as they're happening in real time. You don't necessarily have to wait for a show. You can talk to me in Discord. Also, make sure to download Bettercast. It's a ton of fun. We're all in there talking back and forth. You guys can keep your receipts on me as we go in from these bold predictions. I can keep the receipts on you. We can talk about how bad the Bills Giants game is, all the fun. But not only do we get to have that community and that conversation, we get to answer questions and you get the chance to win tickets to redeem for real NFL merchandise. So make sure to go to the Apple Store or Google Play Store and download the Bettercast app today. All right. So coming up, that's about to wrap up our show. We do, like I said, it's Freaky Friday. So Coop and I have swapped time slots. Coop's Fantasy Fiasco with Andrew Cooper is coming up directly after this from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. There is no fantasy football game show today because JL is getting married. So if you follow or see JL out on the Twitter or X streets, make sure to congratulate him. Following that, from the 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern slot, we've got Better Sports Betting with Dan Servadidio and Howard Bender. And from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern, we have the MLB DFS live stream with James Grande and John Impemba in a playoff situation that I am no longer interested in since my Dodgers got eliminated. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Really do appreciate y'all. Have a great weekend. Good luck in all of your matchups. Make sure to join us Sunday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern for myself and John Impemba, 10 a.m. Eastern on Sirius XM for Howard and Bender, for Howard Bender and Andrew Cooper, and then wrap it all up at 11 a.m. Eastern with John Impemba and Coop for the Start Sit Show. As always, have a great weekend, and thank you so much for getting blitzed.